For nearly 30 years, it was one of the biggest mysteries in music. How could the lyrical genius who gave the world the masterpiece Illmatic have 0 Grammy Awards? After 14 nominations and decades of being overlooked, the king from Queens finally got his crown. This is the full story of the 25-year wait, the controversial losses, and what Nas recently said about the Grammys. The story of Nas and the Grammys doesn't really begin with him. It begins with hip-hop itself, knocking on the door of the music industry's biggest stage and being told it wasn't welcome. In 1989, the Recording Academy finally created a category for Best Rap Performance, a move that should have felt like a victory. Hip-hop was no longer just a movement bubbling out of block parties in the Bronx. By then, it was a national force shaping youth culture, language, and fashion. Seeing names like Salt-N-Pepa, JJ Fad, LL Cool J, Kool Moe Dee, and DJ Jazzy Jeff, the Fresh Prince on the ballot should have been proof that rap had earned its seat at the table. But there was a catch. The award wouldn't be televised. The Academy was willing to hand out trophies, but they weren't ready to let rap stand on the same stage as rock and pop in front of millions of viewers. That decision sent a clear message. Hip-hop might be included, but it was not respected. The community did not take it quietly. Russell Simmons and Lyrical Cohen, two of the genre's most powerful figures at the time, organized a boycott. LL Cool J, The Fresh Prince, and Jazzy Jeff refused to attend, even though they were nominees. Public Enemy and Slick Rick stood with them too. Will Smith, still in his early 20s and just beginning his crossover from rap star to television personality, summed up what everyone was feeling when he said, "We think we deserve to be on the telecast." What might have seemed like a simple scheduling choice by the Grammys instead exposed their negative bias towards the rap culture. The protests didn't stop there. In 1991, Public Enemy refused to show up again, frustrated that the Academy still treated rap like an afterthought. Even Sinead O'Connor, an Irish singer with no direct ties to the culture, shaved a Public Enemy logo into the side of her head at the 1989 MTV Video Music Awards to show solidarity, proving the Grammys' blind spots were obvious far beyond the borders of hip-hop. This was the environment in which a kid from Queens named Nasir Jones came into the picture. In 1994, just 20 years old, Nas released his debut album, Illmatic. It was not only a record, but a revolution. With sharp, poetic storytelling layered over beats crafted by DJ Premier, Pete Rock, Large Professor, and Q-Tip, the album captured the raw energy of New York street life in a way that had never been done before. Critics immediately hailed it as a masterpiece. MTV called it the first classic of the year, while The Source gave it the rare 5 mics rating, a stamp of legendary status. Over time, Illmatic would come to be considered by many as the greatest hip-hop album ever recorded. But when the 1995 Grammy nominations were announced, Illmatic wasn't there. Not one nomination, no recognition. The Academy didn't just overlook the project, it acted as if it never existed. For Nas, this wasn't simply a personal disappointment. It was a brutal reminder of hip-hop's ongoing struggle. If an album as groundbreaking and flawless as Illmatic couldn't even get a nod, then what did that say about how the Grammys truly valued rap? That snub became the original wound in Nas's long and complicated relationship with the Grammys. It set the tone for the next 25 years, where Nas would deliver some of the most acclaimed work in music, but continually find himself standing on the outside of the industry's most prestigious stage. The Academy's failure cut on 2 levels. First, in its refusal to give hip-hop proper visibility, as shown by the early decision to keep rap off television, and second, in its refusal to understand the culture on its own terms. To the Recording Academy, success often meant pop sales and crossover hits. To hip-hop, success was about authenticity, lyricism, and the ability to reflect real life. For Nas, the fight had only just begun. If Illmatic being ignored in 1995 was the first wound, then what followed over the next 25 years felt like salt poured into it again and again. Nas did not disappear from the conversation, far from it. He became a regular face on Grammy nomination lists, almost like the Academy wanted to remind him that it noticed his brilliance, but not enough to actually crown him. Year after year, he was nominated, and year after year, he walked away empty-handed. 14 straight times he sat through the spectacle, and 14 straight times he watched someone else walk to the stage. His first shot came in 1997 with If I Ruled the World. Imagine that! The Lauryn Hill-assisted anthem from his second album, It Was Written. The song had everything the Grammys usually love: commercial success, crossover appeal, and artistry that still held true to hip-hop roots. But the award for Best Rap Solo Performance went to LL Cool J's Hey Lover. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Nas's first loss came at the hands of a man who had once boycotted the Grammys for disrespecting hip-hop. only for that same institution to later hold him up as a safe and polished face of the culture. It was a reminder that while Nas was carrying the raw voice of the streets, the Academy often rewarded what it considered more comfortable. This became the theme. When Nas leaned into sharp political commentary, the Academy nodded but never embraced him fully. Hip Hop is Dead in 2006 and his 2008 Untitled album both picked up nominations. These were not easy listens. They were confrontational, bold statements about America, about race, about the industry itself. Critics hailed them as important records, but for Grammy voters, they were too risky. When he showed up to the 2008 ceremony with Kellis, both wearing outfits emblazoned with the word that had shaken the industry, he was not just walking the red carpet. He was forcing the institution to look in the mirror. But still, he lost. Kanye West's Graduation won in 2008, and Lil Wayne's Thay Carter III took it the year after. Those albums dominated the charts and sold millions. And to the Academy, that made them safer choices. The cruelest chapter of all came in 2013. Nas's album Life is Good was deeply personal, a reflection on his failed marriage, his family, and the man he had become after years of being seen as the street prophet of Queensbridge. Critics loved it, calling it his most complete work in years. The Academy nominated him 4 times that night. He seemed hopeful, even grateful, saying he felt blessed just to be recognized and was enjoying the journey. But when the winners were announced, not one of his nominations converted into a trophy. His song Daughters, a heartbreaking and beautifully honest track about the struggles of raising a teenage girl, lost to Jazzy and Kanye West's Is in Paris, a song that had become a global anthem but was built around braggadocio and spectacle. The album itself lost to Drake's Take Care. It was a clean sweep, and once again, Nas went home with nothing. By this point, it was hard not to see a pattern. The Grammys liked Nas enough to keep him in the conversation, but when it came to choosing winners, the Academy almost always leaned towards safer, more commercial records. Nas himself began to express what everyone already suspected. He did not believe the Grammys were capable of truly getting it right. In a 2015 interview, he said he appreciated the nominations, but he did not expect the institution to ever make the correct call. That mix of gratitude and resignation summed up his entire relationship with the show. And it wasn't just about him. Hip-hop as a whole had a complicated history with the Grammys, and Nas's journey was a reflection of that larger story. Kendrick Lamar would later live through almost the exact same experience. In 2014, Lamar's Good Kid, MAAD City, was hailed as a landmark album, the kind of record people study in classrooms. Yet the Grammy for Best Rap Album went to Macklemore and Ryan Lewis for The Heist. The decision was so controversial that even Macklemore felt embarrassed, sending Lamar a text saying, "You got robbed." Lamar would go through it again when To Pimp a Butterfly lost Album of the Year to Taylor Swift's 1989, and when his Pulitzer Prize-winning Damn was overlooked for Bruno Mars's 24K Magic. It was the same story Nas had lived through, just updated for a new generation. Other rappers chose a different approach. Ice Cube, for example, never expected anything from the Grammys. To him, the music he and NWA made was never going to be the kind of music an institution like that would honor, so he never even looked for validation from it. Nas, though, had a different kind of connection to the awards. He did not beg for recognition, but the nominations kept pulling him into the game, like the Academy wanted his presence without ever offering him the crown. It was a constant cycle of acknowledgement without reward, of being seen but never celebrated. For more than 2 decades, this was Nas's Grammy story. A story of nods without victories, of respect without the ultimate validation. After years of watching the Grammys pass him by, Nas entered a new decade with something nobody saw coming. For much of his career, critics and fans agreed he was one of the greatest rappers alive. But there was always this lingering question about consistency. He had the classics, but did he still have the hunger? Then, in 2020, he linked up with a producer who would change everything. Chauncey Hollis, better known as Hit Boy, had already made a name for himself working with Jay-Z, Kanye West, Beyonce, and Drake. But when he joined forces with Nas, something clicked in a way that felt almost fated. It was not just another rapper-producer pairing. It was the kind of chemistry that gives birth to whole new eras. Together, they created a sound that balanced the best of both worlds. Hit Boy's beats were fresh and modern, perfect for the streaming generation, yet they carried enough grit and soul to remind listeners of the golden age of New York hip-hop. For years, Nas had been caught between trying to evolve with the times and staying rooted in his boom-bap foundation. With Hit Boy, he no longer had to choose. The music felt timeless and brand new all at once, and it sparked a run of 6 full albums in just 3 years. For a man already in his late 40s, this kind of productivity felt like a renaissance, a rebirth that reminded everyone why he was a legend in the first place. That creative resurgence finally gave Nas the moment that had escaped him for over 2 decades. At the 63rd Annual Grammy Awards in 2021, after 13 nominations and 25 years of disappointment, he won. King's Disease, the first installment of his collaboration with Hit Boy, was named Best Rap Album. It was not an easy win either. The competition included critically adored projects like Alfredo by Freddie Gibbs and The Alchemist, a written testimony by Jay Electronica, and Royce da 5'9's The Allegory. But this time, the Academy chose Nas. After so many years of being the artist who always came close, he finally had the trophy in his hands. The hip-hop community reacted with equal parts joy and skepticism. Everyone celebrated Nas, but many could not ignore the timing. It felt like the Grammys were giving him what some called a career award, the kind of recognition that should have come decades earlier for albums like Illmatic or Stillmatic. Critics compared it to Martin Scorsese finally winning his Oscar for The Departed after being passed over for classics like Goodfellas and Raging Bull. Nobody doubted King's Disease was a strong album, but the win seemed bigger than just that project. It was the Grammys finally paying a debt they had owed Nas since the 90s. And true to his character, Nas did not treat the moment like a grand personal triumph. He was not glued to the screen waiting for his name to be called. In fact, he was not even watching the show. His business partner, Anthony Sala, was the one who called him with the news. "Are you watching it?" Sala asked. Nas, calm as always, replied, "Nah, you know I don't watch TV, I don't even watch this kind of stuff." It was only when his brother started yelling in the background that it sank in. For anyone else, the first Grammy after a lifetime of waiting might have been emotional. But for Nas, the years of disappointment had already taught him not to expect much. The cool detachment he showed in victory was the same armor that had protected him through all those losses. But a year later, in 2022, he did something that spoke louder than any acceptance speech ever could. The Grammys invited him to perform, a slot usually reserved for recent winners, and Nas turned that stage into a history lesson. Instead of just celebrating King's Disease, he performed a medley of the classics that the Academy had ignored for years. And Nas turned that stage into a history lesson. Instead of just celebrating King's Disease, he performed a medley of the classics that the Academy had ignored for years. He gave them I Can, Made You Look, One Mic, and of course, New York State of Mind. For the millions watching, it was more than just entertainment. It was Nas forcing the institution to confront its own history, making them honor in real time the songs they had overlooked when they mattered most. That performance felt like a reclamation. The Grammy win might have been the Academy's way of making peace, but the performance was Nas's way of showing that he did not need their approval to validate his greatness. It was a full circle. After decades of being nominated but not rewarded, Nas had finally won. And then he turned the very stage that had once shut him out into his own victory lap. Winning the Grammys didn't rewrite his legacy. Nas was already a giant, but it changed something deeper. For the first time, the institution that once shut the door on him looked him in the eye and admitted he belonged. That shift became clear during his sit-down at the Grammy Museum, where moderator Carl Lamar explained that the win carried a weight beyond the usual. For years, Nas had been celebrated by the culture, embraced by fans who already saw him as a legend. But the Grammys were different. That award, after decades of silence, finally made him feel recognized by the very committee that had ignored him for so long. It was not about sales figures or public acclaim, both of which he had already secured. It was about receiving acknowledgement from the one place that had kept its doors closed to him for nearly 30 years. For Nas, the circle that began with Illmatic's snub finally felt complete. Yet while Nas was finding peace with the institution, another giant of the genre was stepping into battle. At the 2024 Grammys, Jay-Z took the stage to accept the Dr. Dre Global Impact Award with his daughter Blue Ivy standing proudly beside him. What should have been a straightforward moment of celebration quickly became something sharper. Jay-Z used the spotlight to turn the Academy's own record against them, pointing out that Beyoncé, despite holding more Grammys than any artist in history, had never been awarded Album of the Year. By highlighting the contradiction in such plain terms, he forced the room to confront its inconsistencies and biases. What started as applause ended in discomfort, as his words cut directly into the heart of the Academy's long-standing flaws. The room froze. Jay wasn't just defending his wife. He was exposing the contradictions of the system in front of the very people who maintained it. He even reached back into history, recalling his 1998 boycott over DMX being snubbed. And before that, Will Smith and DJ Jazzy Jeff walking away from the Grammys in 1989 when rap was boxed out of the broadcast. Then, with a half laugh that barely masked his frustration, Jay drove the knife deeper. Some of you gonna go home tonight and feel like you've been robbed. Some of you may get robbed. Some of you don't belong in the category. When I get nervous, I tell the truth. That speech was more than a critique. It was a king speaking from inside the castle, tearing down the walls brick by brick while the guards stood watching. Jay-Z wasn't asking for a seat at the table. He was reminding the Academy that without artists like him, there would be no table at all. What makes this moment so striking is how the pioneers of hip-hop have each chosen different paths in their later years, almost like chapters of one larger story. Ice Cube never needed a Grammy's approval. He and NWA made it clear from the jump that their validation came from the streets, and he never strayed from that position. LL Cool J, on the other hand, fought in the protests, won his awards, and then eventually became the face of the institution itself, hosting the ceremony year after year while offering a more generous view of what the Grammy could represent. Jay-Z carved his own role as both critic and insider, a man with the most nominations in Grammy history who still used the stage to hold the Academy accountable. And then there was Nas, the quiet journeyman whose relationship with the Grammys mirrored hip-hop's entire fight. First rejected, then strung along through countless losses, before finally receiving the acknowledgement that had been withheld for too long. Together, their stories map out hip-hop's complicated relationship with power. What started as a protest outside the building grew into infiltration, and from there, into a demand for accountability from within. Nas's story is perhaps the clearest reflection of the entire journey. His Grammy didn't define him, but it finally gave closure to the question that had haunted him since Illmatic. Would the establishment ever see what the streets had always known? And now, after all these years, the answer is yes. The real power of that win isn't the gold plating or the title on the plaque. It is what it represents. A culture that fought its way from park jams and block parties to the center of the world stage. It is proof that the doors hip-hop spent decades banging on have finally been cracked open, even if the fight for fairness is far from over. And as Jay-Z made clear in his blistering 2024 speech, the battle has shifted. It is no longer about begging for a seat at the table. It is about holding the entire table accountable. For Nas, the Grammy didn't mark the end of a chase. It marked the end of a question. The question of whether the world beyond his world would ever recognize what he built. With that award in his hands, he could finally pause, look back at the long road behind him, and know that the whole world was not just listening anymore. They were watching.